Welcome to SF Commercial Property Conversations with Bruce Bean, where Bay Area investments meet expert insights. Get ready to unlock the strategies of commercial real estate success.
So today I'm very happy to have Mindy Henderson on with us today, and she's going to talk to us about accessibility and items that building owners can do that they are not aware of that would be so simple and easy and provide a much better accessible building for those that are involved. So Mindy, it's great to have you. If you can give us a little history, that would be great, of who you are and where you came from.
Love to. Thank you so much for having me. So I am in Austin, Texas, and I work for the Muscular Dystrophy Association. Presently, I'm their Vice President of Disability Outreach and Empowerment. Vice President of Disability Outreach and Empowerment, which means that a couple of different things. I get to lead a media platform for them. We have a magazine, a blog, a podcast, all of which I have the pleasure of corralling. And I also am very aligned with our advocacy team. MDA has a fantastic advocacy team that works night and day on all sorts of issues that revolve around making the world a more accessible and a better place for people with neuromuscular disease specifically. I myself am a wheelchair user and live with a condition called spinal muscular atrophy. And I don't want to say that it's the totality of my identity. A disability certainly is not that, but it's been at the heart of a lot of what I've done over the course of my life, and sort of the direction and the trajectory that my life has taken into the work that I'm doing today as an advocate, a speaker, and an author.
So you said earlier that you were originally diagnosed at the Mayo Clinic. So how long ago was that?
I was diagnosed when I was only about 15 months old.
Wow.
And originally at the time, there was a lot less known about these conditions back then. And, I've had a few birthdays since then, won't tell you how many, but, my parents were told at the time that I probably wouldn't live to be 3. And,
Wow.
Clearly I've exceeded that and then some. And grew up in a family that really didn't let me make excuses to not do things just because they were hard. And so, I really went on and architected a life for myself that is very full, and I've reached a lot of the goals that I've set for myself. Still have a few left, but.
Yeah, it certainly seems so. You're very lively. So you went to both Texas State University and got your bachelor's there. And then you went on and got a master's at St. Edward's, which I was not familiar with, which sounds like and looks like a great university.
It's a great university. It's a little a little private university in Austin, Texas. And I got my master's in organizational leadership and ethics there. And it was a great program, a great school. I really enjoyed my time there.
That's fantastic. So let's get into this idea of there's the ADA, and they have all sorts of great rules and regulations on accessibility, and it certainly has made the world much more accessible for all concerned. But even for people riding bikes or using their stroller, it's been fantastic for non-people that aren't necessarily limited. But I would love to know more about this idea of how we could make accessibility even better.
Yeah, and I love that you just said that a lot about the ADA and accessibility in our world has benefited more than just people with disabilities. It's so true. The ADA is a great piece of legislation, and I think it's probably what people know the best when they think about accessibility in our country and what drives that accessibility, the ADA also branches out into all kinds of other things like employment and health and human services and a ton of different other things besides just accessibility. But if you think about curb cuts and if you think about automatic door openers, and moms with strollers or pizza delivery guys that are carrying 20 boxes of pizza and need to get into your building. There are so many use cases for accessibility and for designing our communities in a way that is just more inclusive for everybody.
Yeah, no, we were recently, well, not recently, a year ago, we were in Europe, and it's immediately visible to me that the difference between Europe and the US when it comes to accessibility. So they do not seem to have the same rules and regulations that we have here.
It's true. And I've been to China before. And I mean, if there probably is not a much less accessible country. It's thousands of years old. And of course, nothing like the ADA exists over there. And so it makes sense that it's not going to be as accessible. And it makes you grateful for what we do have in this country. And we're leaps and bounds ahead of other parts of the world. But there's still a lot of work to do. And, when you are a wheelchair user or a person living with a disability, you really do wake up every day into a world that's not quite created for you. And you kind of problem solve your way through your days and figure out how to make things work for you. But I personally am a huge proponent of things like universal design that make things more accessible and more inclusive for people without taking anything away from anyone else. Building something in a universal kind of way may make it wheelchair accessible, but it doesn't make it any less accessible for anyone else. And so that's really kind of the overarching idea that I like to lead with.
So universal design is sort of a more detailed approach to accessibility, or is that just a catch-all name?
I think it's kind of a catch-all name. I do think there are specific universal design practices and things that people could familiarize themselves with. If you're in the design or the architecture business, I think there are people that specialize in that kind of architecture and design. And it's really just a way of being all things to all people, if I can put it that way. It's a way to design things in just like it says, in a very universal way, so that whether I'm a wheelchair person or someone who's visually impaired or an able-bodied person, I can enter through the same entrance. And there may not be stairs. There may be a ramp that's sort of built into the architecture of a building that it's maybe more of an incline than a ramp. For example, when my husband and I built the house that we live in a few years ago. And when I built this house, I told our builders that I wanted to live in a house that was accessible for me, but didn't look like it had been made to be accessible. And I think that that's maybe a really good way to describe universal design. And so at the front door, there's no steps, but there's a subtle incline for, flooding purposes and things like that to protect our house and our threshold. But it doesn't look like it was made to be accessible. We've got the thing that everyone who comes to our house says they wish that they had in their own house. We have a huge sort of roll-in shower with no threshold. But again, it's got the sloping for the flooding and all of that, and a tile bench inside that's gorgeous. And this is a house that, honest to goodness, anyone off the street could come and live in this house. And it has design features that don't make the house any less usable by anyone else, but for a wheelchair user or someone with aging parents or any other set of circumstances could come and live in this house.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think that is a very critical idea that, hey, yeah, we're making this accessible, but we're not making it different in a way that makes it unusual or people automatically think, oh, this is a wheelchair house or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't. Or even for a building, I think that's critical.
Yeah, it really is. And, one of I can't decide if it's one of my favorite stories or one of my least favorite stories to tell, because it was so it just I think it spoke to some of the less kind side of people sometimes. But I worked in an office years ago, and it was a very pretty building. It was a very pretty building. And and yet there were no automatic doors on this building anywhere. It was a commercial building, and had several different entrances, not a single door opener at any of the entrances. And we rented, the company that I worked for rented space in this building, and it took them 2 years of renting space and having offices in this building before the owner of the building agreed to do anything about it, because he didn't want to mess with the aesthetics of the building. He said that his building was too pretty for automatic doors. But there's more than one way to implement automatic doors.
Right.
And so, I think he was envisioning, the typical, button pad that you punch and the doors open, and you've got, maybe a little bit of a clunky, uglier sort of door opener sitting on top of the door frame. And that's not what you have to do nowadays. That doesn't have to be the only solution.
Well, just out of curiosity, how old was that building? Was that a 1960s building?
No, I don't know for sure. I think it was maybe it was built in the 80s or 90s. So not here. It may have predated the ADA, but it wasn't so old that nothing could be done about it.
Right. So it was a contemporary building, and I can see the owner saying, "Oh, this will mess up the design because it's probably got all sorts of straight lines and clean look and so forth." And he didn't think that the ADA would kind of garble it up or whatever.
Right. Exactly.
But it sounds like they found a solution.
He eventually put in one of the door openers that he didn't like. He agreed. He gave us the parking garage entrance, is the one that he finally ponied up and put in an automatic door there. And that was fine. It was a way for me to get into the building, and I happened to park in the parking garage. So, it was fine. But something that's built in a more universal way would allow anyone to come and go the same way that anyone else would. I think is really the point of universal design.
Well, how much, just out of curiosity, in commercial real estate, how much resistance do you think there is to taking a building like that I know I'm working on one right now that is going to spend $250,000 to upgrade their front entry, and the owner wants to do it, but it's expensive
Yeah.
and problematic. And so
Mhm.
I just am curious how much resistance you're finding to that type of situation.
Oh, there's definitely resistance, and it varies. I want to be fair. There are definitely businesses that are more inclined to go a little bit of the extra mile than others are, and then there businesses like this gentleman who, was adamantly opposed to any kind of accessibility that would interfere with aesthetics. I think what I would say is number one, that's really, I think, the argument for number one, doing things the right way in the first place, so that you don't have to go back and retrofit and redo things at huge expenses. But I also really try to encourage people to be creative and to explore and talk to people about options, because like with the door opener example, there are more options than one. And while that option may be the only one that you've ever seen out in public anywhere, it doesn't mean that there aren't other things that exist. You go to the grocery store, and honest to goodness, if I show up at a building and the doors sense me coming and automatically open for me, it's like it's my birthday and Christmas and every holiday you could imagine all rolled into one, because I've found myself in situations before where I've ended up having to sort of sit awkwardly outside of a building or a business, waiting for someone either to notice me and open the door, or walk by and then ask them for their assistance. And that's a hit to anyone's dignity, if you really think about it. And
Oh yeah.
and so, if we talk about, I know I'm belaboring the door opener thing, but
Well,
the problem with your standard door openers and that button that you punch to get inside is, for me and a lot of people that I know, it's the height of that button. And if you're someone like me with the condition that I have a muscular condition. And so reaching up against gravity for me is
oh, that
um,
just to reach up is not.
exactly, to
Yeah,
reach up
yeah.
and push a button. And so I think that, if I'm not mistaken, there are ranges where you're supposed to put those button
Right.
openers. And, something as simple as airing for the lowest possible place that
Uh,
you can place that button would make a huge impact right away, because it's a lot easier. There are fewer examples of people who can't reach down just a little bit than there are people who have trouble reaching up against gravity, like I said. And so that's just one example of something that would be so easy to tweak, or an easy decision to make if you're building something, just to go ahead and put that door opener 6 inches lower. Um, and so there are a lot of different ways that you can be creative like that.
no, that's fantastic. So, how much do you get involved with you? You said earlier that you do occasionally um, work with client services and how they
Mhm.
go together. Is that kind of part of some of the things that you do in the work world?
I do. I love, I speak to companies and people like yourselves about things like architecture and accessibility in our communities. So speaking and education and awareness is a big part of what I do. And so I'm also a big proponent of inclusive product design. I live in Austin, which is a huge high tech company.
Right.
And so, one of the things, I was a product manager in a former life. And so I'm familiar with the product management and product development process. And one thing that I talk to people about a lot, again, is including people with disabilities on your team, because we can think of things that you wouldn't have thought of just because our lived experiences are different and the perspectives that we look at the world through are different. And so yeah, one of my favorite things to do is to go in and talk to companies or other professionals about how they can be more inclusive in whatever it is that they're doing.
Well, I think that's a key role, actually, is that a product designer or project engineer or an architect, they can go through ADA guidelines and do all those kind of things, but they really don't have necessarily firsthand experience with disability. And so to have a person like you involved in the team probably would make it so much easier to go through the process.
And I would love it. And I'm here for you if you need someone like that. Because another thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that while the ADA is fantastic, and like we said earlier, we're leaps and bounds ahead of other parts of the world in our accessibility in this country. Honestly, if you are a person living with a disability, you know that the ADA is really just a good place to start. It's not, there are a lot of gaps still that exist in terms of what was included in the ADA and what hasn't been added yet. And there is so much that that businesses nowadays could be doing that would make them such stronger businesses and so much more competitive if they would do a little bit above and beyond what the ADA and building codes call for. And I think that the way that you do that is, like I said, by involving people who know how they're going to interact with your product, your building, whatever the case may be.
So is there a effort to update the ADA codes?
There's legislation definitely that is, I'll say, active. I don't know how much momentum it's gaining. There are certain bills that I'm particularly interested in, that I'm going to be working with the MDA advocacy team on and trying to see if we can get some traction on some things. But in my research that I've done over the years and in some of the talks that I give about being inclusive in your business, the I think it's 5%. 1 in 4 people in this country lives with a disability, and
Wow.
5% of that population represents, are you ready for this? 5% represents $21 billion of discretionary income that community of people has available to them. And so there are huge revenue streams that are not being tapped into. And so when I say by doing these things and by being more inclusive and considering people with disabilities specifically, you can become, honest to goodness, a much stronger, much more competitive business. And for that matter, the other thing that I've learned is that if you're a business that includes people with disabilities in your marketing or your advertising, you will do 66% more revenue than someone who doesn't.
Wow. Okay. So
Isn't
I
that
don't know if you,
staggering?
that is staggering. I think we should, those of you listening to this podcast should go and listen to Scott Schutz's podcast, where he talks about compassion and companies that work with compassion. According to his statistics, do 1,400% better than companies that don't use compassion. So I think compassion and disability are a very interesting team.
I agree 100%. And it's, and then if you even extrapolate it out further, the people in those disabled people's lives, their family, their friends, their caregivers, it becomes a huge number of people who are going to be loyal to you and your brand because you showed compassion or you worked in an inclusive way.
So I want to go back to your stats again. So 1 in 5 are disabled. So that's 20%. And then you're saying
it's actually 1 in 4. I may have said 1 in 5.
1 in 4.
It's
so 25%.
1 in 4 people.
1 in 4. So that's 25%. And then of that 25%, 5% of that population represents how many?
$21 billion in discretionary income. Yeah. Wow. And they could be using that income to travel, to eat at your restaurant, to stay in your hotel, to buy your products, your clothing. It's huge.
Yeah. No, that's a gigantic number. So people should be trying to cater to that population for sure.
I mean, I think so. in my completely unbiased opinion, I agree wholeheartedly. But the numbers do back it up. And, and your point about compassion, we can make the business cases. I think we just did. But, there's also an element of just doing the right thing. And, that's a lot of people in this country to wake up every morning and wonder what problem solving they're going to have to do in their lives because something wasn't made for them.
Well, I mean, just your simple example of having to wait at a door for someone to come through.
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a simple solution. Well, not so simple, but it's a very good case study for how this whole world works.
It is.
So, I think that's fantastic. So how would people get a hold of you?
Yeah,
your expertise.
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on, almost all the social media. I think I'm on Instagram. I'm Mindy Henderson Speaks, Facebook, and probably most importantly, LinkedIn. I'm probably the most active there. I'm just Mindy Henderson on LinkedIn.
That's fantastic. Well, I look forward to talking to you again. This was a fantastic conversation. I'll see you soon.
Thank you for making this conversation a priority.
That's a wrap on today's journey through the SF commercial real estate scene. Ready to share your story? Visit sfcommercialconversations.com/guest. Your insights could lead the next conversation.